Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Scary Stories We Tell. I am one of your hosts, Chris.
Sorry, I had like a total freeze because I moved the screen and like the stuff hadn't disappeared yet. Anyway, restart.
You can just go ahead and just pretend like I said what I said and then just pick it up from there.
Okay. And I'm your other host who finally decided to show up for an episode, Just Fired.
And on this episode of Scary Stories We Tell, we are joined by our good friend. He is an investigative journalist. Him and I share something in common that I will bring up that he may not know, which is we are both technically part of the Dollar Baby program, though we never got to direct ours because we did ours in March of 2020 is when we got the paperwork back.
Oh,
boy,
no.
Wasn't that a shame?
That's crazy.
He is the Lord Commander of the Night Watch, your friend and mine, true crime author extraordinaire, Mr. James Renner.
Thank you. I want to hear a little bit more about that. So the Dollar Baby program, of course, being this thing that Stephen King has where you can get the rights to one of his stories for $1 for 1 year. And I did, I adapted a short story of his called All That You Love Will Be Carried Away back in 2005, starring Joe Bob Briggs. And we also had Michael Stanley playing a cop, and Harvey Pekar did a little cameo. What was the story that you were going to do?
Morning Deliveries Milkman #1 of all the things. And we got the paperwork, we sent him the money, and then literally the pandemic happened. It was just like, oh, I guess this isn't happening now.
That you can't get a grace period. You should still go through with it.
I think we were all. I'm gonna put it this way. I think that, as they would say, the ship has sailed.
Yeah,
maybe.
sure.
You know, the opportunity was there, and then it's not anymore.
That's an obscure Stephen King story, and I'm pretty well versed in Stephen King. But remind me, what is the premise of that?
Yeah, I can't remember that conceit of that one.
I believe it's something about like it's a guy who's doing deliveries, and then his friend that he's delivering for, it turns out he's a murderer or something. I'm honestly have not thought too much about it because it's kind of it's one of those things where it's like, man, that was fun. All I remember is we were doing a more of a updated take on it, and it was one of those stories from Skeleton Crew that's like, we read all of them. We're like, nobody in their right mind would try to adapt this one. So let's do this one.
Yeah,
and
that's perfect.
Right. And so we had a script together and everything. But but you actually made yours. So
yeah, we got really lucky with it because it premiered at the Montreal World Film Festival in 2005. So that was a lot of fun. We got to go up to Montreal, but weird thing about the Montreal Film Festival that year was and don't ask me why, but it was like they were rushing to put it together. There was some, I don't know, they had taken a break or had moved the dates or whatever. So the filmmakers didn't get to know when their piece was playing until the day that the festival started.
Wow.
And the festival's 10 days long. So we got up there on day one to find out that it wasn't going to show until like the second to the last day of the film festival. So I couldn't stay up there that long. And I was like, I think 24, 25 years old at the time, and just couldn't swing it. So I missed the showing, but it was, I got to go to the opening night gala and stuff, and that was fun.
But James, you're not known for your Dollar Baby film. I think you're known more for your exploits in the world of true crime and being an investigative journalist. So since the last time we talked, give us kind of a little update about what's been keeping you busy around the true crime circles, as it were.
Yeah. Back in 2000, I guess it was 2021, the late fall, I started a new podcast called True Crime This Week. That is, I was surprised that nobody was doing it. It's kind of a wrap up on all the big true crime stories of the week. It comes out on Friday mornings, anywhere you get podcasts, and it's about a half an hour long. And I you can tune in and hear all the true crime stories that you missed. That'll probably one day be Netflix specials, and the second half is always updates on cold cases and weird news and things like that.
Have you enjoyed doing the podcast gig as a weekly podcaster? Have you enjoyed it?
I have, yeah. It takes a lot of work. It's pretty much a full day thing. On Thursdays I do it, and I'm writing all day, and then I record late at night so it could come out on Friday morning. And I it keeps me up to date on everything that's going on, which is fun. I just try to have fun with it and slide in some jokes every once in a while and keep it lighthearted. I don't do a lot of stuff on, crimes against kids or anything like that, but I try to pick the topical stories and then the stories of interest. But it's been good. It's building. It's fun to watch, the audience grow slowly, every week, and just trying to do something, just trying to do something a little different with it.
When I saw your show and I realized that there wasn't a thing like that, I was as shocked as you were. Like, how was there not a last week tonight for true crime?
Yes, it's which is exactly kind of what I modeled it off of.
I was picking it up when I listened to it. Let me put it that way. That was the way it was being received, at least by me. Again, the audience of one receiving it that way, but I totally picked up on it.
Thanks. And I have I found a new home for my books. Kind of a big transition. My literary agent retired and went into the world of podcasting. And so I was scrambling to get a new literary agent, and right as I was coming out with a new book, and luckily it all kind of came together in a really nice way. I've got a nice new agent and a new editor at Kensington, and the editor Michaela Hamilton is her name, and she's kind of a legend in the business, and she's worked with a lot of the big true crime authors. And so my first book for her is called Little Crazy Children, and it comes out June 27th. And I've already signed with her for the next 2 books. So I should have a book coming out just about every year for the next 3 years.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
MCUing yourself over here. I like it.
I'm trying. Knock on wood. I mean,
hell yeah, dude! A book a year. I mean, that keeps you in a conversation that a lot of people have a hard time being part of, which is like a person who is seen as an expert, but is an expert who is continually there, kind of Anne Rule adjacent. Maybe
I'm trying. But every day I'm hustling.
Hell yeah, hell yeah, man!
That's it, man.
Before we go further into the true crime stuff, I did want to ask to touch on just for a moment, any new information that you could share with us about Byron Priest? Because that was the last thing we talked about. I don't know if Jess told you, I saw one of those books in person at a half-price books in Texas. They were selling it for $500. And
my God.
I almost bought it. I mean, it's one of those things where like, I will probably never see it again in its original form. And it was just like the guy like let me touch it, let me hold it out of the case, and I was like, man, this is wild. And I saw the price and I was like, no fucking way.
This is really wild.
This is really wild.
He knows what he has for sure.
Yeah.
So Byron wrote this book, The Secret, back in 1982, and inside the book are puzzles and poems that lead you to the location of 12 buried keys. And these keys are all over the country. And last time we talked, I had made a documentary on this subject, and I had traveled all over the country trying to dig up these keys. Unfortunately, never got one. Got to hang out with Josh Gates for an episode of his show. And I think we were really close to getting the one in Milwaukee, but we got hit by a crazy storm that forced us to shut down. But since we've last talked, a third key was found in Boston, and this fan of The Secret had this. He'd walk to work every day along the same route, and he had gotten in his mind that there was a key buried underneath home plate at, I think it was home plate, maybe it was second, one of the bases in this baseball field near his house. And one day he was walking to work, and there was a construction crew out there, and they were going to redo the baseball field. And so he ran over to the construction foreman and said, "Hey, this is going to sound really strange, but I think there's buried treasure on that field. And if you do find something, here's my number. Call me right away." Right?
Just being like, I would, I'd want in on the treasure though. I think if I were the foreman.
Yeah. In Boston, they're not. I'm surprised the guy's just like, get away from,
Yeah, like if we find something, it's mine. Like,
Right. But they did find something, and then they called him right away, and they realized that it was the treasure. So he called Josh Gates. Josh Gates flew in, and they unearthed the cask and found the third key. And so now there are still 9 somewhere around the country. If you go onto the websites devoted to the secret, they've essentially narrowed it down to the likely cities that they're in. Although one is still contested. It could either be St. Louis, Missouri, or Quebec City, Montreal, or Montreal up in Canada. And I lean more towards Canada. I think it's up there. So yeah, one was found, and the hunt is still on. I've gotten to know one of Byron's daughters, Kara, pretty well. She's now running Emma Roberts' production company, and we're trying to find something to work on together. It's just the whole experience introduced me to a lot of really interesting people, and I think about Byron's family quite a bit. So it's a really fun project to work on, because it was a little different than the sad true crime stuff that I tend to work on.
So speaking of that sad true crime stuff.
I was just about to say, and now we can circle right back to Shaker Heights.
Sure. So yeah, this new book that's coming out in June it's called Little Crazy Children, and it's from a quote from The Crucible, which is, and I'm paraphrasing here, and The Crucible, of course, is about the Salem witch trials. And the quote is something like, "We are as we always were in Salem, but now the little crazy children are holding the keys to the kingdom." And the book is about the murder of Lisa Pruitt, who was 16 years old in 1990. She just gotten her driver's license, but she made plans to sneak out of the house that night and ride her bike over to her boyfriend's place. His parents lived in a mansion at the corner of South Woodland and Lee. His dad was in charge of the, if I'm getting this right, the pediatric unit at the Cleveland Clinic. He was high up in the Cleveland Clinic.
I guess we should say, for those of you who aren't familiar with Shaker Heights in Ohio, it's all mansions, like big mansions, very, very rich neighborhood.
Not the place that you'd expect a young girl to be murdered. And she was stabbed close to like 30 times. She was stabbed to death. Her body was found about 30 feet from her boyfriend's back door on the day that he got out of the mental hospital. And he would write her letters while he was in there that literally said, quote, "Stay away from me when I get out. I don't want to kill you." And so after all that, like a day after the murder, a lot of friends of the boyfriend went to the police and said, "Hey, it can't be the boyfriend. He's such a nice guy. It's got to be this kid, Kevin Young, that we go to school with, because he wears Metallica t-shirts and is just really strange." And unfortunately, the police kind of went with it and went after this kid. There's no evidence ever linking him to the crime, but they eventually did put him on trial. He was acquitted, but everybody in Shaker Heights, pretty much to this day, thinks that he did it and just got away with it because he got a fancy lawyer. And so I went into it hoping to exonerate Kevin Young, which I think I did, and to find the real killer. And I was, sure that I was going to find this evidence, and I figured the boyfriend would make a really good suspect, right? I mean, he had to. And what shocked me was a couple weeks into my research, I came across the name of another young man who was at the scene of the murder, the night of the murder. He was at the scene. He places himself there. And the police knew about this kid, and the prosecutor did, and they never shared it with the defense. They kind of hid it. And he's a much better suspect. And once I started looking into him, it's one of those things where you're peeling back the layers of the onion, and just all the stuff comes out. Where about 4 or 5 years before Lisa was murdered, 8 doors north of where her body was found, there was a double murder. Philip and Dorothy Porter, who were, I think, in their 70s, early 80s. Now, Philip Porter was the former executive editor at the Plain Dealer, And Dorothy was an artist, a renowned artist, and somebody snuck into their house and stabbed them to death one night. Philip was found in his bed. It appeared as though Dorothy interrupted this person as they came into the house because she was found downstairs. Whoever did it came in through the kitchen window, which is relatively small, and must have left that same way because the house was locked from the inside. So it's one of those closed room mysteries, right? So I find this young man who was at the scene of Lisa's murder the night of the murder, and he lived right behind the Porters. And not only that, he's the only witness in the Porters case. When I pulled the police reports, his name was right there because the police were interviewing people, and he came and said, "Oh yeah, I saw a black guy running away from the house that night." And if you're from Shaker, all you have to do is say, I saw a black guy running away from this crime, and that's all the police hear after that.
Yep, even now.
Yeah. So suddenly, he's this one person is the only link to 3 of these murders, and I think he did all 3. I went to his. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2017. Essentially, drank himself to death, and I tracked down his common law wife, who they had a daughter, and that's who he was living with the last few years of his life. And I went to her. I didn't think she'd talk to me, but she welcomed me in. She lives in Twinsburg, and welcomed me into her apartment. And we sat and we talked for a while. And finally, I just came out and asked her. I said, "Do you think your husband killed Lisa Pruitt?" And she thought for a second. And she said, "Well, let me tell you a story." She said, when he was in preschool, another boy pushed him down on the playground, and he didn't do anything. He didn't react. But when lunchtime came around, he sat next to this boy. And when the other boy was distracted and looked the other way, he poured Comet cleaner into the kid's sandwich, and he almost died. He said, and he was like that his entire life. That's just who he was. She said, "Absolutely, I think he killed Lisa. And he probably killed the elderly couple too."
Wow.
Yeah. So it was quite a trip writing that book. I'm hoping that when it comes out, it reopens the investigation and forces Shaker Heights police to test the evidence, because they at least have evidence in the Porter's case that would have DNA on it. And if they could show that this kid killed the elderly couple, then, he almost certainly killed Lisa too.
Right. Wow. Well, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to reading that. And so you were talking about kind of a little bit about how this book came to be before we started in on what the book is. What's different about how this book came to be as opposed to other ones that you've put out?
Well, one thing is it was something I always wanted to get to, and then I had an experience similar to what you dealt with those dollar babies, where I had a TV series that was about to film, and it was based on an article that I had written, and it was I had planned to live in New Orleans for a month and a half, and we had cast it. Melissa Leo was playing the lead, and Tate Donovan was in it, and a couple other really great actors. And
I think that was right before we talked last, because I remember I think this just sounds you mentioning New Orleans for whatever reason, that had to have been around the time we last spoke.
Yep. So it was all ready to go. We were in New Orleans, and we were 3 days away from shooting, and it was March 13th, 2020. And it was a Friday, and of course the next day they shut down the city, and then they shut down production. They said, "Hey, this is only going to be 2 weeks. We'll be right back here." And that 2 weeks became 2 years. And so when I got back home, I had nothing to do. Like, my slate was completely empty for the next few months. And I had slowly gathered thousands of pages of documents on the Lisa Pruitt case, because I knew I'd get around to it one day. And just like, Meredith Burgess in Twilight Zone, finally I had time enough at last. And so I started going through the notes and slowly putting this book together. And so if not for COVID, if not for the failure of one project, this never would have happened. And I never would have found this other suspect in the notes, at least not anytime soon. So kind of a neat way that it all came together. That's what I did it was essentially my COVID project. It the book it's a little different from what I've done before. And, I tend to write true crime memoirs where I'm talking about how I'm investigating and the danger that I get into and the misadventures. And that's in there, but it's in the very last part. It's divided into 3 sections. You've got the investigation, and it takes you through, it's kind of through the eyes of the police as they're investigating the murder. And then you have the trial, and it's all that courtroom drama. From the point of view of the lawyers. And then you have the 3rd section, which is my investigation all these years later. So yeah, it's a little different, but that's how it came together this time.
Great. Chris, did you have any more questions on that particular case?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So you kind of mentioned it seems that, you've spoken with some people that knew this person and all that, like you've mentioned some of the other cases you've talked about. I mean, the Amy Mahalovic case, I think that was the first thing we ever talked about, the 3 of us. And
sure,
you wrote that book back in 2006, and then, it's 2023 now with this coming out, writing about a case that doesn't have a conclusion versus a case that, again, you seemingly are kind of coming into a point where you feel like you kind of can say who you think did it and why and how and what their reasoning is. Can I tell me a little bit about the difference between those 2 things? And is one more rewarding than the other, or does it even matter to you as someone who's, thrown yourself into true crime?
Yeah, well, it's just as soon as a case is solved, I lose interest. So the cases that interest me enough to spend time to write a book on are all unsolved. And it really is, it's not something that's done in true crime a lot. A lot of the true crime books that you'll find in the bookstore shelves are about cases that are solved for many reasons, because you'll have access to a lot more documents that way, because usually once a case is solved, the documents become public record, all of them. So there's a lot more to work with. And also legally, it's a lot easier because if, for my books, when I'm writing about an unsolved case, there's a very intense legal review that happens because, we can't come out and say somebody did it, without evidence. And, I'm not going to come out and say somebody did it if they haven't been arrested. I'll have my thoughts, but I've done this long enough to know that even when somebody looks 100% guilty, there's still a possibility that it's some other weird answer. So, that it's more difficult, I think, to write about unsolved mysteries, but it's also the only type of true crime that I really like. So I keep, somebody posted on Twitter, yesterday they had found True Crime Addict, my last true crime book, for $5 at a used bookstore in Pasadena, and made some comment about how you can't wait to read about another case that James didn't solve, or like something like that, or and I realized I've kind of made a career out of not solving cases. And,
you also don't want to be,
though,
you don't want to be Graysmith though, where you claim to know the answer and then it gets picked apart by people on the internet 20 years later. Cause
but
that's like in my opinion, that's like the big unsolved crime case that has the big unsolved book is Zodiac. And I mean, Graysmith, went through all those machinations, like you said, where, he can't say the name of the person because the person's still alive. And then he writes the second book to reveal who it is. And then it all gets picked apart by people on the internet 15 years later. And it's like, it's hard to kind of, I feel like it would be hard to balance the two, especially also the chatter, people going, oh, it's another unsolved case. How else do they get solved unless people have an active discussion about them?
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
And unsolved mysteries exist for a reason. Most of what we talk about on this show is about stuff that's not, really solvable or provable, but also, not entirely disprovable either. So it's just the fun mystery of life.
I think there's something uniquely human about an unsolved mystery and wanting to try to put together that puzzle and thinking that you might be smarter than anybody else that's read about the case. I grew up on unsolved mysteries. I loved unsolved mysteries. And I didn't grow up on solved mysteries.
Right.
I don't think that would be as fun of a TV show and solved mysteries.
So kind of keeping with the theme, of things that are uniquely human, you were also working on some science fiction dealing with the themes of memory and identity and what we perceive as reality. all things very uniquely human.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was called The Great Forgetting. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was?
Yeah. So The Great Forgetting, it was my second novel. And there's a few stories about The Great Forgetting. But what's interesting is it's one of those books that, and I'm going to sound pretentious, but I think it was a little ahead of its time, which I think hurt the book, because now you go on TikTok and there's this whole movement going on right now. I don't know have you guys looked into or discussed Tartaria?
No, no, I
Oh my
personally
God.
have not.
You got to look into it. So the idea is that there was a chunk of human history sometime in the 1800s where there was an advanced civilization that essentially took over the world, called Tartaria, and they built these huge structures that still stand to this day in all over the world, like in Chicago and San Francisco, all throughout the old world. And that it's the same type of architecture, that it's the only thing that remains. And the idea is that they were so evil when we defeated them that we rewrote human history to completely wipe them out of history. But we still have some of their old architecture hanging around and some signs that they existed. They're on some old maps and things like that. So it's a trippy conspiracy, but I didn't know anything about that when I wrote The Great Forgetting in 2015, and it's a very similar idea. My idea behind the book is that there was 100 years of human history that we as a world society decided to forget about because it was so bad. And so we kind of reset the clock.
Is it now?
It should be.
We're living in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, remember, this book came out right before Trump was elected. So I certainly would have changed things around since then. And, so the clock kind of reset in 1964, and we decided to forget all this stuff. And the stories about this history teacher from Lakewood who starts putting together the pieces and goes on a grand adventure to try to wake up the world about this conspiracy. And there's a lot of fun themes in it. It's pretty much a love letter to conspiracy theories, because it's kind of like it takes all the really cool conspiracies and says that they're all connected into this grand conspiracy that is the Great Forgetting. So you have chemtrails and fluoride in the water making people forget, and things like ape-human hybrids that the Nazis were fiddling around with.
Jesse Ventura talked about those on his show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, humansies.
Yeah, humansies.
Yeah, yeah. That's the only other time I've heard anybody bring that up is right now in Jesse Ventura. So.
Oddly enough, there is some legitimate evidence to suggest that they absolutely tried to do it.
Oh, I think that's for sure.
There is some evidence to suggest that they were successful a couple times. It's pretty trippy, but I don't know how much I believe it, but they certainly were trying. And so that's what The Great Forgetting's about. One other little story about that book is, it was the second book in a 2-book contract, which, it's like I sold that book without anybody reading it, just on an idea, and then I had to go write it. And it was like handing the keys to the car to your teenage kid. And so I just went all out. And when I turned the manuscript in, it was around 1,000 pages.
Wow.
And the editor and agent, they were like, nobody reads books this long. There's no way we could publish this. They gave me a couple of options. The one option that we kind of thought about for a minute was turning it into a trilogy and making it YA. But I didn't want to do that. So I spent 9 months editing my own manuscript down from 1,000 pages to about 450. And wow. That hurt. So
holy shit, that is it's a huge
like a whole nother you took a whole nother book out of your book.
Yeah, I did. So if I ever make it big time, I do want to do like a complete uncut version of that book. even if I have to like put it through like a small press or, self-publish or something.
That's wild. Holy shit. I mean, so it's not it wasn't 1-to-1 1,000, was it? Because it was like 1,000 pages, 1,000 pages printed, right?
No, it's like it would have been probably about between 750 and 800 pages printed.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Only Stephen King's allowed to write that long. We all know that.
That is verbatim what I was told.
Right.
Only Stephen King is allowed to write that long?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. So in this world of conspiracy theories, I'm curious, what is your favorite conspiracy theory?
My favorite conspiracy, honestly, right now it's probably this Tartaria stuff, and that there was this global superpower that that we decided to wipe completely out of history. I really like that idea. So I think if The Great Forgetting had come out in the last, if it came out now, I think it would do a lot better because it could tie in with that Tartaria has a huge fan base right now. It's like, and it's only going to get bigger in the next six months to a year. So definitely dive into it. It's pretty on TikTok. There's this guy who he's a young man from England, and he has this TikTok series on Tartaria, but I can't tell if he legitimately believes in this or if he's just having fun, but it's so fun to watch. He has these things that he says, he'll start off and he'll show you these pieces of architecture that are supposed to be from Tartaria, and he's like way so serious, and he's like, "Oh, I got your ass." And then I'll show you there these mud floods that buried some of the houses, whenever this big war was with the civilization, and he'll be like, "Oh my diddy, oh my days," and he's just super fun to listen to.
So it's like a conspiracy of absence, then, which is like the most fun conspiracy. Something's going on and it just can't prove it. We can't prove it.
We can never prove it.
We can't ever prove it because the whole conspiracy centers around the fact that it is intentionally gone.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, hard one to disprove.
Yeah, the best kind, almost the kind that can't be disproven at all. It's the best kind of conspiracy.
And a harmless-ish one.
Yeah. So James, less contemporary. Is there a conspiracy theory of all of them that is your favorite? Less maybe specifically right now, but because I mean we have a long many years of conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah. Well, I did a deep dive into 9/11 when I was working at Scene a couple years after it happened, and I spoke to one of the main people behind the 9/11 report, and he convinced me that Building 7 was intentionally brought down. There's no doubt that Al Qaeda and the terrorists brought down the Twin Towers, but Building 7 should not have. I'm totally convinced Building 7 should not have collapsed, and that it was allowed or intentionally brought down that day.
I think that's the conspiracy within 9/11 that it gets missed. I'm so with you. That's like when I say I believe the 9/11 conspiracy stuff, it's that and only that. It's Building 7. Like there's no way. There's no way.
Yeah, and I don't think they knew that the attack was going to happen or that it was going to happen there, and they let people die. I think there were just some people that took advantage of that situation, and they're like, look, we got this opportunity. Let's just pull it and sweep this. What we have in this building just never existed now.
And it's just a bunch of like tax information and all kinds, just paperwork. Like that's not a fun conspiracy to just blow up a building to destroy paperwork. Like what fun is that in a digital age? The fun is that it allows you to make about $1 trillion disappear without any sort of paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, that's not an exciting 9/11 conspiracy. I mean, that's not Jet B or Jet Fuel Melt Steel B.
It's not as sexy.
It's not sexy. Yeah.
No. I think
still
that's
fucked up.
Yeah, well, but I think also it also speaks to this bigger idea of hopefully the narrative on conspiracy theories kind of maybe shifting and looking less at because again, like when you talk about the conspiracy behind, like, say, someone like JFK, right? For me, it's less about who pulled the trigger and how many people were trying to pull the trigger at once, right? Because, like, yeah, somebody pulled the trigger and he is dead, but like, how many people were trying to do the same thing, and how many
got there? Yeah,
and like, because I honestly, I think the like, similar to 9/11, the JFK, at least conspiracy theory now, isn't maybe it's not whether or not Oswald killed him, but how many other people were in Dealey Plaza at the time trying to do the exact same thing.
People behind the curtains. Yeah.
The craziest,
exactly.
The craziest theory I've heard about that is that Oswald shot Kennedy and he lived and went on to serve another term. And somehow that put us on track to a very dangerous place. And so you have like 5 or 6 time travelers that came back and were all trying to shoot him at once, knowing that they have the cover. And then
that's amazing.
And then kind of overdid it and had to disappear really quickly.
The craziest one that I ever heard, I don't know if y'all saw this, it was that one of the Secret Service agents shot him by accident.
Yes, I've heard that.
I've heard that.
That'd be terrible.
I mean, that's like, that for me is like, oh my God. Like
that scene in Pulp Fiction with the guy in the back.
Turns around. Oops, it's just the president this time.
Yep.
Major cover up now.
There a sign outside is this a dead president storage? I don't know.
But speaking of cover ups and things that people don't like to talk about, I know happen to know you're writing a new book.
Oh yeah,
about
Boy
about
Scouts.
Yeah.
Oh, cool! I'm an Eagle Scout. Yikes!
Oh, great.
Oh, great. I mean, I don't give a shit. Like,
I'm not. I would die in the forest.
They've come a long way, and by that I mean maybe you don't get kicked out for being gay anymore. But there was a kid in my fucking troop who got kicked out for being gay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like, so yikes, boy.
That's terrible. So the book is it's about the Boy Scouts in general and the history of it. That most people, I think, the Boy Scouts have become such a tradition in America that we don't think about where it came from or how it started or what it's about. So it's about all that, but it's also a very personal book because it's about the summer that I spent as a camp counselor at this place called Seven Ranges Scout Reservation, which is the biggest Boy Scout camp in Ohio. And I was a counselor there one summer in 1995 when I was 17. And that summer, a bunch of crazy stuff happened. One of them being one of the counselors, a staff member, sexually assaulted a teenage boy, and then went home and killed himself. And that happened in the middle of summer. And then there's a lot there that's about this secret society within the Seven Ranges called Pipestone. And here's what Pipestone's all about. And I can't believe this is still going on or ever went on, but it's been going on for about 70 years. So it's this, on Friday nights, they take boys as young as 11 out into the woods behind camp at about midnight. And you run through these trails, and then they take you to the ceremonial ring where these skulls of dead animals, cows mostly, I think, are on poles around this circular clearing. There's a big fire in the middle. Then you've got all these white middle-aged guys who have painted their bodies red, like Native Americans, and they've got the red face on as well. And, some of them have the chief feathers, and you take the boy and he's forced to kneel in between the legs of the chief and then forced to drink this stuff called bitrix, which is a very bitter substance, and you can't spit it out or you got to start over. And then he brings out a human skull, and the kid looks inside the skull to find the password for the next year. And the first password is secrecy. And that, after all the kids go through the ceremony, the chief gives this speech about the importance of secrecy, even keeping secrets from your parents. And it kind of starts this, it instills this idea of keeping secrets, which allowed a lot of other bad things to happen. And you go back to camp, and you can take, there's 5 years of pipestone. You get a little piece of this pipestone every year until you get the full pipestone at year 5. And at the end of the ceremony every year, there's this big speech, and by the chief. And the 4th year speech starts out verbatim. Here's how they started out, or did, when I went through it. Masturbation leads to curiosity. And then they talk about the dangers. And these kids at that point are as young as 13, 14 years old. The dangers of masturbation, how you shouldn't do it, and how homosexuality is immoral and leads to an immature life and an unfulfilled life, and how you should not do that, and how you should put that in the past. And even friendships with the same sex, you should be putting in the past by then. And it's terribly, terribly damaging to generations of kids. And I wrote about this, not to the extent that I'm writing right now, but I wrote about it in an article for Scene back in 2005. And at that time, they promised me that they were going to change the speeches and make Pipestone safer. And as I'm researching this book, I, just a couple of weeks ago found out that they never in fact did that. So the timing is actually really good. What's going on inside the Boy Scouts right now is they were sued pretty much into bankruptcy, and they are settling with all these abuse victims. And the news hasn't caught up with this yet, but I believe they will soon, because people are comparing this to the Catholic Church abuse scandal. Mm-hmm. But nobody's looked at the numbers, because it's exponentially worse than what happened in the Catholic Church. Because in the United States, there were 11,000 victims that came forward to sue the Catholic Church. So far, in the last few years with the Boy Scouts, 92,000 kids have come forward to sue the Boy Scouts of America.
Holy fuck.
It's exponentially worse than what happened in the Catholic Church. And that's because Catholic Church it's one segment of the population, right? It's Catholics. Right. But Boy Scouts is non-denominational, and it's America.
Anyone can be, yeah.
Yeah. So we, just thinking about those numbers, and for every kid that did come forward and is getting a settlement, I tell you, there's 6 to 8 more that have kept quiet. So the numbers are staggering. And there's a bill that's going through the Ohio House right now that will get rid of the statute of limitations for people suing the Boy Scouts. And I was interviewing the state representative about this, and I found out that there was a hearing on Tuesday, as in 2 days from now. And I said, hey, do you need any other people talking about this? And she said, yeah. So I kind of accidentally stumbled into this, and I'm testifying in front of the Ohio House.
Wow.
On Tuesday.
Holy shit. Wow. Congratulations.
So we'll see. It's the book is definitely going to make some waves, I think. And it's going to talk about the crimes that happened at the summer camp that year, and things that I've gone through. And I'm I'm not making it a secret. I'm a survivor of abuse in the Boy Scouts. And so it's deeply personal, and it's a true crime book that all the crimes that happened were me or my friends. So it's a little different than the stuff I've written about before.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing with us about this project. And
sure. Yeah.
I can't wait to see what waves it makes, quite honestly. Well-deserved waves.
Yeah. Because I didn't experience any of that, and I don't know if anyone in my troop did, but to think about the scale of just where I grew up and the amount of kids that I knew were in it, it's horrifying. Horrifying is not even the right word.
I'm learning a lot too about just the history of scouting, and what I found very interesting that makes a lot of sense now is that scouting was founded around 1910, and it was specifically at that time. We tend to think that the things that are happening now are just didn't happen back then, but back at that moment in history, there was this huge push towards liberalism, and people were becoming more and more liberal, and the conservatives got scared, and they wanted a way to create a new generation of conservative-minded people. And that is how the Boy Scouts were founded. It was specifically with the purpose of instilling conservative values into kids before they were old enough to vote, before they were old enough to become political. So it was, we think about that now, and think about like if liberals decided to put together an organization to teach kids liberal values. I mean, the world would freak out. This country would freak out.
Right.
But that's what the Boy Scouts is. It's
indoctrination.
Indoctrination for
indoctrination through the way of fun. It's about fun indoctrination. It's about
tie some knots and not people that don't look like you.
I mean, you were in it, James, just like I was. Like, that's the whole thing. Is like it's fun indoctrination. It's indoctrination dressed up, but it's like it's pseudo military, and it is also pseudo. I mean, it's not. It's probably more pseudo religious now than it was when I was in it or when you were in it. But like, they meet in churches. Churches are often the ones sponsoring these fucking organizations. Like, it's not a surprise. They say, do my duty to God and my country. They say God before they say most anything else.
I have a lot of fond memories. I honestly do. I have a lot of fond memories from Scouts. I met some great friends, and it taught me self-reliance, and is probably one of the reasons that I've been successful. But so did some good things, but looking back, overall, I mean, just the anti-LGBTQ stuff is sickening. And what we didn't realize when we were in it was that it was quietly being run by the Church of Latter-day Saints. It was run by the Mormons.
Brother man, I knew that when I was in Scouts. I will tell you that. Oh, brother man, there were so many Mormon kids. Every single Mormon kid I knew was in Scouts. And their brothers were in Scouts and their sisters were in Girl Scouts, but that mattered less. But every Mormon kid I knew, every Mormon kid I grew up with is an Eagle Scout and was an Eagle Scout before I was.
Sure. They automatically get signed up if you're or not now, because once the Boy Scouts started letting in transgender teenagers, that was the final straw for the Mormons, and they cut ties. But up until 3 years ago, it was run. Every Mormon boy was automatically signed up.
We would joke about it all the time, like that. If there was anything that like the dirty secrets, definitely had a run in with the LGBTQ thing in my troop, but also knew so many kids that were just like Mormon.
Where'd you grow up? Out of curiosity,
North Texas.
Oh, okay. Wow. I don't hear the twang in your voice. Did you get rid of the?
I could turn it on and off.
Okay. After you get a couple drinks in you.
I do imitations and voices a lot. So like I've just learned how to like just try to have like something that don't have a whole lot of nothing to
it. Nice. Okay.
But no, I knew a lot of Mormon kids that were Scouts, to the point where like, it was like a running joke in my troop. It's like, oh, that's the Mormon troop. That's the troop of all the Mormon kids. Like, and they were the Eagle Scout factories. They were just pumping out the Eagle Scouts.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Yeah. Man, Scouts is fucked up. Like I like yourself. I have some positive memories, but I was bullied a lot. I was bullied in Scouts more than I was bullied in school.
That's bizarre. I mean,
tell me about it, because if now I would whoop every ass that came my way. But I was bullied in Scouts more. So yeah,
in my troop, the Boy Scouts were where the nerds would go to find, so that we weren't bullied.
Oh, I was being bullied by loser kids. Like it's like, you know what I mean? It was like if you were in band and you were bullied, like you're being bullied by the loser kids, because like band kid, it's like same thing. I'm so glad someone is taking to task the Boy Scouts. Like I really am.
It's putting a target on me that's a little scary, but I think it'll be fine. I don't think it'll be any worse than the Maura Murray case. But
right.
And it's it's a good fight to have. So I've been on lots of adventures because of this book already. Last weekend I was out in Pipestone, Minnesota, buying a pipestone pipe from a Native American who carved it himself. And I'm looking into the book is a lot about how to deal with trauma and how to deal with PTSD from the things we went through as kids. And so the week before that, I was in DC having psilocybin therapy. And I can't recommend that enough, by the way. It was amazing. And I can't wait to write about it. But I tell you what, that should be legal everywhere, because if you have, if you're dealing with PTSD, if you're dealing with substance abuse issues, and you get in those loops of thought, those just cascading thoughts, that's one thing it does, is it just kind of resets everything, and those loops go away, and the patterns of thought go away, and it's just kind of like you've reset and you feel good.
So, if you don't mind me asking, because you're literally the first person who's ever mentioned this out loud, what was that process like?
So, I went into there's a man that I met up with there that has years of experience with therapy, and it's important that you do the therapy along with the psilocybin, and that you have somebody that's monitoring you and helping guide you. And so that's what I did. And there's this group called, I think they're called MAPS, but this whole group is put together to make this therapy available to veterans of war. And what they think might be possible, and this is why Congress is looking at it seriously right now, is they believe that they believe that they can treat soldiers with PTSD with psilocybin and make it possible for them to actually return to the battlefield. It's that powerful, that good, and that's what it did for the people I met with. And so I went into this. I was in a room, and they had a playlist for this. So I was listening to music, Native American music, African music, and I took it as chocolate. And there are places and actually in DC, it is decriminalized in DC. So what we were doing was legal. But in other places like Oakland, outside of San Francisco and Denver, you can actually buy this in dispensaries, and they dose it in chocolate bars. So you can take one square of the chocolate, and that's essentially a microdose. You're not going to feel any of the crazy effects, but you're going to feel a little mood. You're going to feel better. You're going to have better mood. And so he gave me, I took half the chocolate bar at first. And it's like any other edible where it takes about 45 minutes to really kick in. And so about an hour into it, an hour and 15 minutes into it, I wasn't really feeling much. I was seeing a little bit of tracing, and like when he'd walk in front of lights, things like that. And so I took another like 4 or 5 squares and then listened to the music. And that's when probably about 20 minutes later is when things started getting weird, and in a good way. And this music, the best way I can, people say that you see sound, and that's true. But it's not essentially seeing, because that's describing it through a different sense, right? It's trying to say you're seeing the sound, but it's almost like a different sense. For me, I think it would be like what blind people would imagine sight would be, if that makes any sense. And it felt like the music, this Native American music, was being filtered through me, through all the experiences and memories that I've ever had, and coming out as these visuals, like light through a prism. And the visuals I got were very fabric based. So I was seeing giant quilts, being constructed around me. And the therapy part of it, he directed me towards some trauma, and and what I wanted to do was get, make it germane to the book and deal with some trauma that I had through the Boy Scouts. But, your mind takes it different ways. And what I relived was trauma that I experienced from my stepmother, actually. And, when I was 3, my parents divorced. My father married this woman who began hitting me with a closed fist when I was 4 years old. So that memory kicked up, and I was suddenly there. And what happened was, we were talking through it, and I was watching as the scene played out, and the scene started being swallowed up by tentacles, which sounds scary, right? It sounds like a bad trip, but it was extremely calming, because it was essentially like devouring the trauma, devouring this bad memory, that I didn't have to deal with it anymore because it was being consumed. And so that was very profound, very interesting. And yeah, and so I finished up there, and then I got an Uber back to my hotel about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I thought I was done, but the full effect of the psilocybin kicked in my hotel room, and I made the mistake of walking into the bathroom to freshen up, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and what this stuff does is it takes away your subjectivity. So and your ego. And so when you look at yourself in the mirror, you see yourself, I think, for the first time as somebody else would see you. And I became fascinated with my gray hair and my age. And so I just stared and looked at myself. And then I was like, wow, this is really fun. This is interesting. In the hotels, they have those little round mirrors that sit on the counter that like magnify everything. Well, I made the mistake of looking in there, and I looked so old. Like I could see where the elasticity under my eyes was failing, and so like I'm transfixed, and I'm like, well, I want to see what I look like from behind. So I pick up that mirror and I aim it back so I can see, and suddenly there's like 4 versions of me in all these mirrors, and I lost track of which one was me. And so I was like stuck. I was stuck inside these mirrors for like 20 minutes and talking to myself and trying to like work my way out of the mirrors. So that was the craziest experience that happened.
I've never done psilocybin therapy. I've done psilocybin.
How did that work
and
for
I
you?
have always been told not to look in the mirror. I love it. I think it's great. I do. I agree with you in that it does reset kind of just how you feel and like feel connected with certain things. And it's definitely a different kind of trip than any, other kind of, main popular hallucinogenic, like LSD or something that's a process chemical based thing that can provide all manner of trips and feelings. But, with psilocybin being a, natural product, like it does have a very, like you said, very connected feeling. You just feel very connected to things. And I also experience a lot of stuff texturally.
Cool.
When it comes to like the hallucinations with psilocybin. One trip I watched, my partner and I watched the Crystal Light Aerobics Championship, something or other from the late 80s, hosted by Alan Thicke, and we watched it on like a VHS, so it was all grainy and whatever to begin with. And I felt like I was there. And at one point it was paused. But I didn't feel like it was paused.
Sure.
But yeah, I've had, other experiences that were like just more centered with myself and just that hyper fixation, and where it sounds like it could be freaky anytime you describe it to people. Like the idea sounds very freaky, but anytime I've done that or had experiences like that with psilocybin, it still felt very good. And I will say that one experience that I have that's recurring with psilocybin experiences is just random crying. But not feeling sad, but not like sad. Like I'm not feeling the sadness that is coming with it, but there is like, it is crying, like, or just like laughing.
Yeah. Same thing.
And crying at the same time, not laughing so hard you cry, but laughing and crying at the same time.
Yeah. I don't know what's,
and that's but it's also it's a hugely releasing feeling.
Yeah. Very, cathartic, right? It's when I woke up in the morning, I had, these dried streaks out, from my eyes because I was crying so much. Yeah. But it wasn't a bad cry like you're saying. Exactly. So they tell you to stay away from the mirrors because somebody forgot to give me that.
That's
warning.
always been the thing.
Jesus,
yeah. I mean,
that seems like the warning of warnings.
That's the number one thing, that for me, the warnings I got, before trying anything to do with psilocybin is very much the same warnings I get you get for any other kind of hallucinogenic. Is also, here's the thing with mushrooms too. People recommend that you do them in outside, like in an open space.
Yeah.
I've never done that just because I don't live in an area where I'm comfortable going at night during the day, there's a ton of people in the parks. We have great parks here, sure, but there's a ton of people and park rangers. And at night, fuck you, I'm not going out in the middle of the park and doing hallucinations in the middle of the night. So I have never experienced that. All of my experiences have been within a contained space, but I was always warned that you need to be in an environment that is clean to like your standard of clean. Like it doesn't have to be spotless, just to where you're not going to hyper fixate on a problem.
Sure.
So your environment is comfy. You have, your snacks, your water, your things that you need, that they're readily available to you. So you don't have to go through too many steps to get to a place that you need. To avoid mirrors, and to just generally avoid things that you think could cause you to have a bad trip. Now, for me, for most people, that would be like, don't watch scary movies when you're hallucinating. For me, that doesn't
that's your comfort.
Me. That's a fun time, right?
Yeah.
That's a fun time for me. But for other people, I can see why it wouldn't be a fun time.
They also, I think, what's very important, and I'm glad that we talked through this before, is to have a mantra in the back of your mind that just reminds you that everything you're experiencing is temporary. That this is that no matter how scary it gets or how weird it gets, it's temporary, and you're going to feel normal again. And I felt.
And with psilocybin, it's a few hours, maybe like 8 to 8 hours tops.
Yeah, I felt
with like LSD, you have to be careful because you don't know how much, if you don't necessarily know how much you're dosing, you could be tripping for like 10, 12, 15 hours, right?
Yeah, that would be scary.
And it would be exhausting, absolutely just mentally, physically exhausting, because your brain, your brain is firing so much faster and so much more powerfully than it's used to. I can't imagine the come down on that being. Ooh.
Yeah. But it was I found it to be very helpful, and I hope it gets to be kind of open to more and more people sooner than later.
I think it definitely is, like in some of the research that I've just been staying up on with legalization as far as cannabis and other plant-based medicines go. Psilocybin is one that's definitely getting a lot more traction. I guess I think in Pennsylvania, they're actually working on some stuff with that there, because it's starting to become decriminalized in certain states across the country. Because I agree. I think it's great, and even the stuff that you can get, like even the mushroom-based stuff that you can buy like in stores, right? Like the mushroom-based coffees, the mushroom-based drinks and stuff like that. I've gotten a few of those, and they do work too. They do have that kind of uplifting. The biggest thing I can say about mushrooms and psilocybin is that it just makes you feel happy, even if you're having like a sad time. Like,
I think that's true. Yeah, it's like there's nothing to worry about. It reminds you that everything. In
my experience, user discretion advised.
Yeah, for sure. I've got it. Somehow you reminded me of another story that I don't know fits in with many other places or people. So I got to tell you the story. And it was one of the craziest things that happened, I don't think I told this the last time. Stop me if I did, but because I don't think it was that long ago. It's probably more like a year and a half ago. Anyways, I was out. I've got this little dog who's a Shorkie, half Shih Tzu, half Yorkie. And I take him out at night before bed to do his business. And it's 9:30 at night, and I take him out. And I live on one of the main roads here in Akron. And late at night, it's usually empty. And but I can see this main drag. And I look up and I see, my first thought is that what I'm seeing is a deer. And then I realize, it's not a deer. And then because of the way it's running, it's kind of like running on all fours, and it's lower to the ground. And then I thought, is that like a naked man like dashing down the road and
on like all fours?
I sure hope not.
Yeah,
that's not that far from my house.
Right. And I'm like, and then I realize no, and then I see that it has a long bushy tail, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And then it gets up close to us, and I grab the dog because I realize it's a fucking cougar.
Wait, what?
Like, like a mountain lion or something, and it's like just booking down Exchange, right? And
What?
I
That's
could
literally like 2 streets from my apartment, FYI. Like,
well, the story gets I eventually find out what it is. The story gets weirder, but so I rush inside, and I'm like, I go to my wife and kids. I'm like, you're never gonna believe what I just saw. And they're like, yeah, right, you didn't see that. And I'm like, I swear to God, it was a giant cat that I saw. And they're like, no way. So the only thing I could think to do was go onto Reddit. On the Akron, there's an Akron subreddit, and I typed out, "Hey, has anybody seen a cougar running around Akron?" And I get back comments like, "What? Like, yeah, there's cougars at the bar all the time."
right.
So
And,
smart
Yeah, your
asses,
mom down the
internet
street.
smart asses, folks. Heyo.
But then the next day, I get a message from a guy who works in animal control in Akron, and he said, "I think I know what you saw." He said, I was called out to a house on Merriman Road, one of the big mansions over there. And they called me instead of the police because they had this animal that they shouldn't have had, but
Of course.
they were raising. Yeah.
You Ohioans with your illegal animals, huh?
Right?
It's just so easy to do here.
And turns out they had a serval cat that got loose like a day or two before I saw and I'm sure that's what it was. I saw it on the road. But these serval cats can get pretty big, like the size
town
of
is weird.
Right? Are you pulling it up on online?
Yeah. And it's like a tall cat.
Yeah.
I don't know how else it's like a cheetah with a cat, like a cute kitty face.
Right. Yep.
It's a weird looking cat.
It can get to be the size of a really
It'd be weird to see running at you.
Like a Great Dane. Like it could be about the size of a Great Dane. And I'm sure that's what I saw. But it's so weird to like take your dog out for a walk and you see this giant cat, running down the main road in Akron and nobody else. So I was a little afraid because I didn't would it have eaten the little teeny tiny dog?
I'm guaranteed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if a hawk, you got to be worried about like hawks flying away with like chihuahuas and stuff like that, let alone a wild cat that has Great Dane legs.
Right. So yeah, weird stuff happens in Akron all the time.
I was expecting it to be the return of the Loveland Frog. I thought I was out one night and all of a sudden I saw the frog following me home.
Do you see my Loveland Frog poster behind me?
I do.
Yeah. Next to Clint Eastwood.
That's I think about that Loveland Frog a lot. I think about that poor little frog man out there just sitting on the road, just waiting.
That's another one of those stories that there's definitely some sort of truth. There's some nugget of truth in it that,
somebody saw something weird.
Yeah, right.
Well, bringing it back to Akron and home before we wrap up for this podcast. Last time we talked about a project you had been working on called the Porchlight Project.
Oh, yeah.
So if you could just let maybe our new listeners know, let our old listeners know what that is, and if there's any updates on it since we last spoke.
Sure. And it's good timing on that. So the Porchlight Project is a nonprofit that I started in 2019, along with a woman named Alexa Doubt from Kent State. We put this thing together, and it was what we do is we raise money for new DNA testing and genetic genealogy for cold cases in Ohio. And we got really lucky with our first case, and we funded new DNA testing and genealogy for the Barbara Blatnick case, the 16-year-old or 17-year-old young woman who was abducted from Garfield Heights, Ohio, back in '87, and her body was found by Blossom. And we were actually able to solve that case, and it led to the arrest of this man named James Renner in 2020. And so we were off to a good start. And since then, we've solved a handful of cases, and we're currently funding, I think, six cases that are in different stages. And actually tomorrow, I am driving to Youngstown for a press conference because our our genealogist, and we now have a genealogist specifically working for Porchlight, solved a John Doe case down in Youngstown. They had
Wow, that's great.
Thanks. Yeah, so they're going to make the big announcement tomorrow on
How
that.
old is that case?
That's a good question. I don't have it in front of me. It's, I think, maybe 20 or 30 years
Okay.
old.
That's wild.
Yeah. So we're having a lot of luck, and we could take on 2 or 3 more cases, but we totally rely on donations. And so if anybody's interested in helping out or just learning more, we're at porchlightonline.org.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely include that link in the show notes and everything when we
thank you.
put this out.
I do want to ask you, James, because again, like you've mentioned, this is, it's essentially you would say crowdfunded, right? In a way.
Yeah, sure.
Have you noticed in doing this that there seems to be, once you've got the idea together, what you're going to do and how you're going to put it into practice with some of these cases, have you found that things come together pretty easily once the right people are on it? Or do you notice a lot of pushback, or people just kind of waiting, like, what's taken you so long? Why is you're finally here? Thank you. What's kind of been the response?
It's a little bit of all that. Yeah. It's just gone a lot better than I expected it would. And, we don't have a lot of pushback. People are happy when they hear from us. And especially since, we're saying that, not only can we do this, but we're going to pay for it for you. So they've got really nothing to lose.
It's just, it's interesting to me because it seems like the private sector or crowdfunding may be the future of getting the cold cases solved, or at least helping augment what the crime isn't stopping, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't be that way, but yeah, I think that's that seems to be the faster route to go these days, is the private sourcing of this, because each case costs around $6,000, $6,000 to $8,000, and that's not a lot. When you think that is going to give you an answer to a cold case, it doesn't seem like that much. But when you have 1,000 cold cases to work on, that number becomes pretty staggering too. So hopefully the price will come down on that as the technology gets better. I think it will. But right now it's going up, not just because of inflation, but because people, the people that kind of run these databases are realizing that they can make a lot of money because there's so much interest in it right now.
And with these cold cases, when you're getting the DNA, you're saying it's $6,000 to $8,000. Most of that is tied up in just the testing of the DNA.
A lot of it's the testing. Yep. And then the genealogy can get to be expensive too. You could pay somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 for the genealogy because in order to track the DNA down to the source, sometimes you have to spend hundreds of hours working through family trees and building out these family trees, and it's very tedious work and it takes a lot of time.
Well, I mean, that's why we unfortunately are having people like you and everybody, not unfortunately, but unfortunately, that you have to take over for people who should be doing that job. But
yeah, sure.
With time that they don't seem to have to spare.
The crime doesn't stop, right? I mean, there's a new case every day, I'm sure, and there's plenty of. I mean, Porchlight Project more or less focused in Ohio, right? But I'm sure
we're just Ohio.
But each state must have something similar, right? Or
you would think, but
is that not the case?
It's really not. I think we did a very smart thing by keeping it Ohio centric, but
sure,
because there's enough cases to work here forever.
Right.
But there's really not anything similar to what we do in other states yet. I have lofty goals of getting the Porchlight really, self-sufficient and, flush with grants and money, but I'm still a long ways. But, if we can get to that point, then we'd look at doing the same thing in other states.
Right. Because, it makes sense, right? Obviously, look, I live in a state much smaller than Ohio. I can only guess how many cold cases there are in Nebraska, but it wouldn't be the the amount that there are in Ohio, right?
Yeah, but I guarantee you there's enough John Does and Jane Does.
Sure, right. Of course.
That and those are just as rewarding to me as
Sure.
the suspect cases because you're giving somebody their name back.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, I guarantee every state has enough cases that something like Porchlight could go on for forever in those. So it's just a matter.
What would it take to get there? What would it take to
Money,
get to that point?
Money. I'm trying. What we're trying to do now is figure out public grants and state grants so that I mean, if the state of Ohio would just give us $500,000, we'd solve all their cold cases for them. But it's just getting to the point to convince them that we're worth investing into. So
it's a public. I mean, it's a public good, right? Like yeah. It's a civil. I mean, I look at what you're doing in a lot of ways as a civil service, right? Like there are many ways to serve the community without working working directly in the bureaucracy of the community. And one of the ways is to put your talents to good use. That's why I ask if there's a thing in other places, because I mean, we have a presence in Nebraska. You have a presence in Ohio. I know people that have presences in other states. Like, to mobilize those people to get that moving in the right direction wouldn't be terribly hard outside of the financial part.
Right.
I mean, I think anyone worth anything in the true crime space would agree we are doing this to hopefully help other people.
Yeah. And to find the bad guys for sure.
Right. Or to do some good, right? Because again, we're being given a platform here. We all have a platform to do something, to try and do something at least. So
for sure.
And with something like Porchlight, you're actually able to, which is clearly must be beyond rewarding. So
it is. Yeah. It's when we get one of these solves, which are few and far between, but they do happen, like tomorrow, it's going to be great being at that press conference. So check it out if you get a chance. It'll be on the news at some point.
Awesome. There's been a lot of big Jane Does and John Does solved. The Boy in the Box got solved a couple months ago. So
the big ones.
Yeah.
There's all the, it's actually making my real job, writing about unsolved mysteries, it's going to make the job extinct, because any case with DNA it's going to be solved in the next few years. So
right, good bad thing, right?
Yeah,
good bad thing.
I'd be very happy to just switch over and write fantasy for the rest of my life. So
yeah,
be fun.
There you go.
Awesome.
All right,
well,
guys,
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap up here because I'm sure it's past most of our bedtimes.
Right.
So yeah, other than Porchlight, where obviously people can probably find you pretty easily, but where would you like to direct people if they want to find you?
Yeah, best place is probably just my website, which is jamesrenner.com. Not Jeremy Renner. He was Hawkeye in the Avengers, but jamesrenner.com. Yeah, everything's on there.
Great. What about you, Chris?
Weirding Way Media. That's where you can find me, and that's where you can find Jess. That's where you can find all the things that we work on.
Yeah.
That's it. That's our network of mobilization. It's just to listen to the goofy, weird shit that we make. So
hey, maybe we can add a Porchlight podcast to that at some point,
or just something. Let's do something a little bit more productive. Come on, making people laugh ain't enough.
No mystery is closed to an open mind.